Hello, hello. Welcome to the Pure Desire Podcast on YouTube. I am your host, Trevor Windsor. This is a weekly podcast helping you take back your life from the effects of unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. Sexual brokenness impacts us all, men and women who are stuck in shame and are unsure if healing is actually possible. Church leaders who want to help but don't know where to start. Parents who don't know how to help their kids develop sexual integrity. Wherever you're at, this podcast is for you. Through sharing stories of healing, interviewing addiction and betrayal experts, and normalizing the conversation on sexuality, we offer a clear plan for recovery and healing from the effects of unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. You have what it takes to break free, heal your relationships, and take back your life. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us so much and really just pushes our message forward. All right, with that, let's get to this week's episode. Carol Juergensen Sheets, thank you so much for being with us on the Pure Desire Podcast. We're happy to have you.
I am so happy to be here, and it's been a while. It's taken us a while to get our schedules together.
Yes, it has.
We worked it out.
The Lord's favor is now upon us. Okay, so our time together today will be spent talking through how people who have struggled with sexual addiction can help support, love, and ultimately help their spouse heal. And Nick and I, even before you jumped on, were talking about this is such an important conversation. We have so many married couples who are in this situation where a betrayed partner wants more understanding, and an addicted or struggling spouse absolutely knows this is part of it, is understanding more. And so you have written a resource on this, aptly titled Help Her Heal. It's an empathy workbook for sex addicts to help their partners heal. And we just want to learn from your research, from your work, from your experience. And so as we jump into our conversation, Carol, will you some of our listeners maybe aren't familiar with your work or even your resource. And so can you fill our listeners in a little bit of background, a little bit of your story and your work?
Well, yeah, I actually became a CSAT, a certified sex addictions therapist, in 2007. And the beautiful thing about that is I also worked in radio. And so I actually, guys, have the oldest podcast in the world on sex addiction.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah, 2007. I've done it every week since. I've got thousands of episodes. But the bottom line is, 1 year into it, I found that women were listening to my show. 52% of my listening audience was women. And I first went, oh, that's a lot of female sex addicts. And then I went, no, wait a minute. That's wives trying to understand their husband, because the show was specifically for sex addiction and men. And so I realized they needed more psychoeducation. And as I was working diligently on trying to figure out how I could help him to help her heal, I had two hypotheses, because he was having trouble with empathy. And I said, either he never had empathy, and that may have led to his sex addiction, or he had empathy, but the sex addiction robbed him from his ability to have empathy. Because, although they live a dual life, we know that empathy really means putting yourself in somebody else's position. And how could he stay cognizant of what he was doing to her and continue that behavior? So I think the empathy dried up a bit. And I decided to write something up for him on how to really communicate, how to have empathy, what a traumatized brain was, as well as other relational skills like focused listening and mirroring and spraying oneself with Teflon so that he doesn't go into shame.
Yeah.
And then when I did that, Help Her Heal was born.
That's awesome.
Well, Carol, we recommend that workbook all the time. It's a subject that, as men go through Pure Desire materials, understanding what your spouse is going through is touched on, but certainly not in the way that it gets unpacked in your workbook. And we've heard from so many how helpful that is. And so unpack a little more the work in there, because I think, as you talked a little bit about empathy, and our listeners probably feel like they understand it a little bit, but delve a little deeper into what is empathy and how can we actively develop empathy, especially if we're the one that has struggled with some form of sex addiction. What does it look like to actually develop in this area?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the truth is that nursing scholar Teresa Wiseman developed a definition for empathy that Brene Brown uses, the great Brene Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And empathy is four things. Empathy is perspective taking, being able to take her perspective. And I don't mean to just allude that sex addicts are males and partners are women, but for the sake of clarity and who I mostly work with, I'm going to just talk that way.
Yeah.
So it's his ability to take her perspective and do so in a non-judgmental way. And when she is traumatized, it's really difficult for him to not wonder what's going on with her, why is she acting crazy, how long is this going to go on? And so I teach men how to stay in the moment with that. And then the other two characteristics is recognizing emotionality, saying, oh boy, I left to go to the grocery store. She was fine. I came back and she's a mess. And I think it's about me. And so instead of heading off to the garage because he thinks I'm the offending item, I'm going to get myself out of here, or I don't like conflict, I'm out of here, to lean into that emotionality and to reflect. It looks like you're really sad right now. What's going on? And when a man can take her perspective, do it non-judgmentally, notice the emotionality, and then give it a feeling, he is en route to the pathway of empathy. And when he does that, it connects him. So I would say, Nick, that truly it's being able to put together that definition for himself, as well as to lean into her as opposed to leaning out. That's empathy.
Yeah. And I it's interesting too. We talk about this a lot on our show that empathy is not necessarily something that is talked about a lot in the church or taught or shown how to do. And I know for me growing up in the traditional Christian home, it's like information-based transformation. And what I've come to understand is that empathy is not learned by reading a book and getting the principles. It's by practicing it, by actually sitting face to face with somebody and being able to go through that encounter. And so I think that that's an important piece you're bringing up, is that it comes over time as you practice those four aspects in relationship with someone else.
Well, you're singing my song, and I'll tell you what, I know we're here to talk about Help Her Heal. And that is truly the book that teaches him empathy. But what I found was I really needed to help them through the process. So I wrote Help Them Heal.
There we go.
Which takes them through the process themselves, in case they don't have a coach, they don't have a counselor, to learn how to do this work in a safe and stable way. And so when you said that, I thought, oh my gosh, it's one thing to read the book. It's another thing to practice, but it really helps if you're with a professional that understands this work and can help both of them receive it, give it, and accept it. It's hard to trust somebody after he has betrayed you in the worst way imaginable. I always say that next to losing a child, sex addiction is the partner's greatest pain.
Yeah. And there's, I think, research that bears that out and backs up a statement like that. One of the things we do hear a lot in our society is that men aren't emotional, or for sure that men aren't as emotional as women. And I think in my experience, both as a group leader and my own story, I think men are just as emotional as women, but we've often been taught to deal with it very differently than women, to stuff it, to ignore it, to avoid it, because we think of emotions often as unmanly. And so I love what you're saying about the couple really doing this together, because I think we try to emphasize that in groups for men, to say this healing journey isn't, it's obviously about changing behavior, yes, but it's also understanding what's driving you. What are you thinking and feeling? And as you start to understand what you're feeling and what your emotions are, it gives you, I think, more tools to then enter into that with your wife and to understand what she's feeling. And rather than, like many of us have done, go into the garage, go for a run, go work out, turn on the TV, just kind of numb out to emotions, we realize, oh, there's something here that needs to be addressed. And if I address it, things could actually get better. There could be improvements rather than this old pattern of just avoidance and I think the negative cycle a lot of couples get in. And so I love that you're equipping not only men to understand that, but then a couple to learn to speak that language together, because then they can really get on the same page with what is driving us, what's triggering things in our relationship, and how do we heal.
Yeah. And, Carol, you talked about it already that, this impact beside losing a child, how really damaging this is, sexual betrayal is. And what we know, from research and then even our work and our resources too, that the brain can just go offline for a betrayed partner. And one of the ways that this can manifest is not being able to articulate or identify what they need, how they feel. And so how can addicted spouses, if at all, support a betrayed partner in that situation? Can they come alongside? Can they help them identify and articulate what they need?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And the first thing I would do is I would encourage them to read about the brain science of partner betrayal. They can go to my website, www.sexhelpwithcarolthecoach, and under resources, the very first video is an animated resource I created and narrated to help them understand what is going on with her brain. And when they understand that she's in a traumatized state, not every partner is, but the majority of them are, he can then kind of follow the recommendations that I make and help her heal, help them heal, which is to acknowledge feelings. So now back to Nick. Nick, you said you believe men have just as many feelings, and I do too. And that's why in Help Her Heal, I wrote about him understanding the traumatized brain first and foremost. That's chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, it's all about feelings. And I keep it to the famous 5, and they are anger, sadness, loneliness, fear, and happiness. Now, we know there are many, many more feelings. Lots of addicts have the feeling wheel, and they're using their wheel to figure out how they feel, and that's amazing. But I find if we keep it to 5, everything else falls under one of those 5. And when they can better identify their feelings by keeping it simple, then they can better help her to identify her feelings. And the traumatized brain is flooded with emotions. She's got every feeling in the world. And so together they can do that dance of identifying feelings, because feelings are great motivators. And I agree 100%, Nick, when you said men are encouraged to stuff it, push it down. In psychological terms, we call it repression, suppression, minimization. And unfortunately, they've been taught to do that. And when something extreme like sexual addiction discovery occurs, wow, they do more of that just to be able to cope with the situation before them. So help them with their feelings. Now back to you, Trevor. Help them with their feelings, and then get them to work together on sharing feelings at least 5 times a week, if not every day. I mean, the importance of a check-in, whether that's the Thanos, whether it's my connection share out of the book, there are a zillion check-ins. And actually, I think they should have a copy of each one, because if you're in this business 10, 20 years, and, a lot of our couples come to us after they've been dealing with discovery for over 30 years. I mean, they're not just fresh.
Right.
It is, they had a discovery, then 10 years later, they had another discovery. Without the proper resources, sex addicts can't maintain sobriety. It's the hardest addiction of all to really learn how to manage. And that is why I'm so thankful for you guys. You have such an incredible program, such an incredible podcast, and you've got a whole entity, your church, to help support these men in this battle.
Totally.
Because it's before them every step they take. So I want to say that what we've got to do is really help them identify feelings, because then the next important thing to do is communication and talking about what happened to them. Both of them. It's not just the partner that's traumatized. Now that he has some level of sobriety, we ask for 90 days before they start the disclosure and the emotional impact letter and the restitution letter. He needs 90 days just to begin to clear his addictive fog, and then be able to go through the process of telling her the truth if she wants it.
Yeah.
Some women, very few, but some women say, I don't want a disclosure. I don't want any more of that in my brain. And that's fair too.
Yep.
But I do say, guys, that after a discovery, the woman should be in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And that means she should be able to let him know what her boundaries are, what her limits are, and he needs to respect that at all costs.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. You need to coin that phrase, use your wheel to help you feel. You put that on a t-shirt, on a mug. As I think about this question, Trevor and Carol, how do we come alongside a spouse that we've wounded? And for me, what was so key is what you already said, Carol, that non-judgmental responsiveness. I found for me, I had to really consciously work on turning down my defensiveness dial. Because when my wife would communicate emotions, how it was making her feel, I would be listening for facts, and I would start to defend facts, because she might say something like, when you were looking at pornography, I felt like you're having an affair. You were cheating on me with all these women. And factually, this part of my brain, like, whoa, that there wasn't physical. I never touched him. Like, blah, blah. And as soon as I would enter into that, I could just see my wife's whole demeanor, like shut down, hard, and is like, what? And what I learned over time and paying that dumb tax was that I was invalidating what she felt because I was defending what I thought to be true. And I had to just let go of that, to let her vent, to let her experience, and to receive it in that non-judgmental way, to say, wow, I can't believe that's how I made you feel, and I'm so sorry. And recognizing whether I thought it was factually true or not wasn't going to help her process the emotions and get to a place of, what she needed to recognize in me is that I was receiving what she said as truth, to say, if that's the way I'm making you feel, I believe you. I believe that's what you're experiencing, and that's horrible, rather than defending like, oh, well, it's not that bad. And I think when someone has struggled with addiction, there are still those echoes of minimization and rationalization that are hard to let go of. And so when we're trying to help our spouse heal, if there's any hint of us still rationalizing or minimizing it, it's going to shut down a conversation so fast, and especially if our spouse is trying to share the emotional impact. We have to just let them get that out to us in a very non-judgmental way, because then we can enter into, okay, how do we help you and me make sure this never happens again?
Well, yeah, and I think it's even an indication of the addictive cycle and pattern that we have in our life, because when things get hard, we find an escape or a way to solve it quickly. And this process of healing and restoration is not a quick process. And so when I start to see pain and emotion, what I perceive to be negative emotion coming from my spouse, okay, I want to solve it really quick, because that's how I've trained myself to act, that I need to find some way to fix this really quickly. And I like what you say, Carol, because I've heard it in a similar way, that restoration happens at the pace of the betrayed partner, not of the recovering spouse. And I think that that's one of the consequences of this situation happening, but then also a really important piece for an addicted, struggling spouse to maintain is that this is not going to go at your pace. Even if your recovery is crushing it leaps and bounds over a short period of time, the restoration process is always going to lag behind.
Well, and you mentioned that, and that is what was so perplexing to the addicts that I worked with, because I gave them the 10 recovery tools and they got better fast. Now, we know they can get better fast. It's actually maintaining that over a long period of time. But they got better fast, and they were so happy that they had found relief and that they were doing well. And she was still in the fetal position on the floor because she wasn't getting the support she needed, and he didn't know what to do for her. And so, earlier you both mentioned communication, and I know that the two most important skills at the beginning of this work is reflective listening, for him to reflectively listen, because that keeps him from defending. His job is just to repeat back what he heard her say.
Yeah.
And that's in Help or Heal. And then the second thing is AVR. And AVR is an empathy formula that teaches men to acknowledge the issue, the challenge, or the problem, validate the primary feeling, because they'll want to say, I know you felt sad, lonely, and angry, but I want them to pick the one that's the primary one, and then reassure. Humbly and with humility, reassure her of the things that you're doing to get on the right track, to be on the right track, to be a recovered addict. And when you combine A for acknowledge, V for validate feelings, and then R for reassurance, it brings down the defensiveness. And that's what's so exciting about the formula. But it's hard to learn. I actually have a certification program teaching these skills to coaches and counselors. I've taught over 140 of them. And it's called ERCM, the Early Recovery Couples Empathy Model. And it says you can't jump into therapy when discovery has occurred. You got to learn the skills to be able to communicate and find safety. And so that's the other shout out that I want to give, and that's to APSATS. You know, I'm on the faculty for APSATS, the partner sensitive program to help her be safe, and I'm on the faculty for ITAP, and they organize and certified sexual addiction therapists. And what I absolutely believe is that we are all pioneers in this field, and we are just now learning how to do this work. And when you know better, you do better. And APSATS really was the premier organization that said, and I explain this to my guys, when partner betrayal has occurred, she needs to get safe and stabilized. And he needs to help her with that process.
Yeah.
And then what helped them heal, and ERCM says, is once she's stabilized, and that can take 12 to 18 months minimum for her to really be able to breathe and feel better about their situation, like they're on the road, the pathway to hope. And after that occurs, there's this second phase called grief, mourning, anger, and loss. And that phase, well, actually, APSATS doesn't put anger in there. I put anger in there because, like you said earlier, the women, the partners need to externalize their feelings in safe ways.
Yeah.
You know, many a partner has come in to see me with her husband or without and said, I'm going crazy. I don't know what's wrong with me. He was carrying the laundry in front of me and I just wanted to kick him down the stairs. That's not me, Carol. I don't do that. What is wrong with me?
Yeah.
And we know when that amygdala in the back of the brain gets triggered, she's going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. And more often than not, fight is a big part of partner betrayal. And we got to calm that part of her down so that they can figure out ways of hearing each other and connecting.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, we're big fans of APSATS, and many of us on staff now have taken that initial training for the non-counseling crowd, for those of us that just want to be equipped. And much like we've recommended the PSAP training through ITAP, we've recommended that people check out APSATS. And I know there's a lot of vowels being thrown around here, so that'll be in the show notes.
All on the show notes.
If you need more information. I get that a lot. What's ITAP? And why does it have two I's? That's, isn't that misspelled?
We asked that question too, yes.
All acronyms. So Coach Carol, here's a great moment for you to put on your coaching hat, because this is, I think, a really challenging situation that comes up.
Yeah.
And couples are just kind of floundering with, I don't even know how to think about this area of my life, because when discovery happens and a wife feels very unsafe, she may be feeling like, we're never going to have sex again. I will never feel safe enough to be sexually intimate with my partner again. And so, and let's maybe push off to the side, because we all know there are situations where that is a very legitimate reality of the behaviors that have happened, and that couple won't be together long term. The marriage won't survive. Yeah. So acknowledging that there are situations like that, I think in this situation, it's more where the couple has determined or believes they'll be staying together, that they'll be working together to make the marriage work, but the betrayed spouse just feels like, I will never feel safe enough to have sex again. What is your encouragement or just direction and coaching when someone is in that place? How do you help them as a couple navigate that?
Well, the many, many, many partners that I've worked with really come in all sizes, shapes, and situations about sex. I mean, sometimes a woman will have sex that night after discovery because she wants to know she's loved and desired.
Yep. Yeah.
But you're right. When they're in that safety and stabilization spot and they can't feel safe, the last thing they want to do is have sex because they don't trust him, and trust is such an important part of sexuality. And or they're afraid that he's going to compare her to the pornography he watched, to the women he cheated with, and to all the events that played into his sexual addiction. So what I do is very much what Dr. Bill and Ginger Bacaw do. And that is, we look at sexual integration really slowly, and we make sure our bases are covered in the other areas of intimacy. We make sure that they're feeling emotionally intimate and they're feeling physically intimate. They can at least sit on the couch together, and she can tolerate him rubbing her leg, and she wants to rub his too. Most women, they really want sex. They want that touch. They want that connection. They're just afraid. So we really have them talk about those fears. And then I give them assignments to slowly work on meeting their emotional, their physical, their social, intellectual, sexual, and spiritual needs. And I find that when they do that, then we can really talk about what are their greatest fears about sex. Well, as he gets healthier, he's able to say, you know what, you're right. I was turned off by the normal. I was turned off by our relationship because I wanted that. My head was in a very compulsive place. And we all know, guys, don't we, that sometimes wondering what's out there was more arousing than the actual going and seeing porn, getting to a prostitute, going to a massage parlor. But once he's cleared his brain and he's in this process of helping her heal, he wants that. Because most men make the choice not to masturbate, right? They don't want to masturbate because then that brings out the fantasies back in their head of what they had before, and they are dimming that down in their brain. And so we do want them to connect. And maybe I advise spooning for 6 months before they even begin for one of them to just lay on top of the other person without sexuality. We have to re-enter this very, very slowly. And then I always say to her, if you don't feel safe, but his recovery is solid, then I'm going to ask you to stretch out of your comfort zone and reframe sex as a gift of closeness that you're giving him. Not sexuality, but closeness, because he's starving for that. And if you can figure out ways to bump up that closeness, you're on the road to having sex again. Now, that being said, I also know that people can live without sex.
Yep.
And so if he's so traumatized that she can't even fathom, and it goes weeks into months, into years, into decades, then he has to decide, what is he going to replace for sexuality? And that might be spending extra time with the grandkids. That might be them doing mission work together. I mean, for the rare couple that can't have sex, they're not doomed and gloomed. They can find other ways to maintain intimacy without sex.
Yeah, that's great. And I would just encourage our listeners that Coach Carroll's words to that spouse of, stretching your comfort zone to provide closeness for him really presumes health and sobriety being established on his side.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are situations we hear about where he's not safe because relapses continue to occur, boundaries are ignored. There's just not health being established. And I think in that situation, like you're not obligated to make him feel close when he's not working on health for you either. So be aware that's in a situation where the couple is really working together. There's progress being made. I love that advice so much, Coach Carroll. That was really good.
Well, and I think even as someone who's listening, who maybe is the recovering spouse, like that's not permission for you to push that and to use that as a reason to get sex with your spouse. Like that's why having, Carol the coach or a clinician or a therapist or someone walking alongside you who's the expert, that's something that they can help you process through together as a couple. So don't feel like we're handing you a baton that you can go, beat over the top of your head your spouse. Like that's not what we're saying. This is, you're talking about a closeness in a relationship that's in the rebuilding phase, not one that's just looking for excuses to be physical.
Well, it really does require a rewiring of that man's brain because we live in a society that has reinforced what you were just talking about, Carol, the novel, the new, the unique, the different, the out of the ordinary. And the brain is wired to be attracted to those things because it does create neurologically a unique chemical hit of, wow, that was new and different. But it's, it's like chasing the golden calf that you can never catch. It's always further ahead of you. And that's what addiction is driven by. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people that have walked through sexual addiction, there has to be that reality of, I may still be battling that fear of missing out, that if I only have this commitment to my spouse, I'm going to miss out on all this stuff that's in our world and the unique and the not like all that is the garbage that is in our world. And until we, I think, face honestly, that's not what I'm after and let go of that, we're really going to be challenged to make the commitments we need to in our marriage. So just to encourage listeners to really face where might we be bought into some of what our society puts in front of us all the time, because it's not healthy and it won't help us in our marriages at all.
Yeah.
Well, and what I recommend oftentimes, I love the disclaimer on that I feel like a partner's in the driver's seat with sexuality, and that puts great pressure on her because A, that's never necessarily happened, and B, partners are very, very naturally empathetic. And they know that sex was a big part of their relationship. Maybe not so much when he was in active addiction because he substituted that. But what I do tell partners is, you really have to set the bar on intimacy by deciding what is it that the two of you want in your intimacy pyramid. I have a pyramid that I teach that Dan Drake and Janice Caudle created, and it came out of their disclosure books. And it says their intimacy tower pyramid is safety and truth need to be on the bottom. And after safety and truth, they need to, the couple needs to feel that honesty in all situations has occurred. And, we know that if he's not honest about taking the trash out, it will send her back to, if you lie about this, you're going to lie about everything. And so then when they can find that, communication is at the next rung and vulnerability is at the next rung. And then intimacy. Now that's their pyramid that they think is so helpful for couples. I, of course, have taken from their pyramid and I say, you've got to have that honesty and truth, but you also have to have empathy. You have to be able to understand and put yourself in her shoes as well as she does his. But that comes down the road, not at the beginning. And then consistency needs to be a part of that intimacy. He's got to be consistent so that he shows her that he's safe. And when there's that kind of safety, then there can be that vulnerability. And that may mean just, I know you probably want a PG podcast, but taking off her clothes in front of him. Everything is typically shut down for a partner. And when she is sexually shut down, she's afraid of setting that off in him in any way, shape, or
Yeah.
form, and even in herself. So I would highly recommend that you all, your listening audience, put together your own pyramid of what is important at the basis or foundation for your relationship. What would come next? What would come next? What would come next? With the point being the intimacy,
Yeah.
Ron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, great advice. Sex is the outcome, not the foundation.
Yeah, and if we're talking about being PG, we've already used the word masturbation like 5 or 6 times, so we're well into the 13 range here. But Carol, just talking about empathy, and this is a question we get a lot from struggling or addicted spouses all the time, is how do they help their partner through a trigger? They see it happen, they know what's happening. How do they help their betrayed partner get through that trigger?
Well, I ascribe in all of my books to Dorrit Reichendahl and Janice Caudle that did the trigger busting CPR for relational rescue. And that is really that involves him. When he sees that something's up, that as opposed to go out in the garage, he come up to her and he say, "Hey, what's going on?" And if a woman's triggered, many times she won't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then he can say, "Are you triggered? It looks like you might be triggered." And if she will at least give some acknowledgement of that, then he needs to validate it and say, "Well, it looks like it's a really big trigger. And I know that my past has caused that trigger." Because the truth is, women get triggered for no reason at all. Something set off an unconscious response and she doesn't know why she's triggered.
Yeah.
Or it can be very clear, he went to the grocery store or the hardware store and she looked at the calendar and realized that the discovery date, it was day after tomorrow. And all of a sudden she goes into that terrible angst of what that day was like. So it may be external, it may be internal, or it may be sensory. She may hear a song on the radio that was their favorite song.
Yeah.
Or she may hear a song on the radio that as she looked at his text, the affair partner referenced as being their song. So when a trigger occurs, he needs to acknowledge that his past has caused that and that he's right there with her now and that she is safe. Now, again, if he is not working impeccable recovery, he can't use those lines because it's another lie.
Yeah.
But if he's really in good recovery, he needs to say, "I'm here with you right now. And I will do whatever it takes to bring you back into co-regulation." And help them heal. I talk about they are going to be co-creating and co-regulating together. That I don't want her to struggle through this by herself. There will be times she'll need to because she's at home by herself or she's in the car by herself. But when they can be together, I want him to sit with her and to acknowledge that it was his past and to ask her how she's feeling and what she needs from him. Some women don't want to be touched. Other women don't mind if he rubs the nape of her neck. But the point is, a trigger will only last so long. And so I really encourage and educate them to understand that. And for her to say, "Nothing bad is happening right now. It's my body that's kept the score of the past.
Yep.
And I'm okay. And I deserve to be able to breathe through this and move on for the rest of my day." In Unleashing Your Power, the book I wrote for partners, I have all sorts of exercises that help her to regulate when he's not around, or, if they've divorced or separated or he's died or whatever. Because I do believe the partner's responsible for finding some ways to maintain safety and stabilization when her body has been activated for whatever reason.
Yeah. And I love that acronym: acknowledge, validate, reassure.
Totally.
What a great tool. I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to use it in my marriage. I'm going to use it in group. And the thing I think I would encourage listeners with as well is if you are the spouse who has struggled with addiction, sexual behaviors, bringing that pain into the marriage, I think the tool you really need here is patience. because triggers, as you've brought up, Coach Carol, they can come at any time. It could be the same trigger over and over. And I think in our mindset, we can feel like, well, I thought we dealt with this. That was last month. Aren't you over it? Or again, that can be the internal response of again, the same trigger. How long? And I think as much as possible, that's to quiet those voices in your own mind, to not say, well, how many times will this happen and how long? Because in some ways, if we respond to that, we can, I think, play a part in perpetuating the trigger.
Yeah. Because
if it happens and our response is, again, why does that still bother you? I think it almost solidifies the trigger in our spouse. It affirms that, yeah, I'm not safe. And it has the opposite impact. So if you hear your own brain saying, again, why is she still stuck on this one? Just take a deep breath and calm your own thoughts and do the AVR of acknowledge, validate, reassure, because that will help them kind of work through and see that, it is safe to bring up this trigger with my spouse.
Well, and two, thinking about that, if you do feel like you need to process it, that's what's so great about being in a group, is that you then have your group members who you can call, like, hey, this just happened. Can I process this with you? Here's how I'm feeling. Here's how I reacted to that trigger. Because it's easy to see a trigger as a problem to be solved in the moment. And I think what both of you are saying is that it's not a problem to be solved in that moment. And that AVR is definitely something to use for sure in the moment, but then also leverage the resources you have in group members as well outside of that.
It's interesting that you said you like that acronym, because so many partners will say, what I need you to do is AVR me. Where's your AVR? Because they want to be acknowledged. And what I tell my helper heal groups, because I have groups specifically that go through this curriculum, I tell them, if there's one thing out of this course that you will remember, I want you to remember to consistently say to her, I know that I caused this pain.
Yep.
I know my past behavior caused it, and I want you to know I haven't forgotten. And there's something about a man telling his wife that then is reassuring in and of itself that he hasn't forgotten, and he's taking full responsibility and accountability. And it seems so counterproductive, you know, especially when she's in an activated state. But when he acknowledges that it was his past or it was the addiction, because I really see them all very, very separately. When a man is working with me, whether it's in the group, individually, or as a couple, he's motivated to make this right. And he can never make it right. But what he can do is rebuild a relationship that has the things that he lost.
Totally.
The trust, the honesty, the safety.
Yeah. And I think sometimes her brain will hold on if she fears he's letting go and moving on and forgetting. And her brain can feel like, I have to hold on to this pain because he's moved on. And sometimes an addict, a former addict, someone who's struggled with addiction, their health can work against them. If they bring it up to their spouse, like, I'm so much better. I'm doing great. That was so last year. We've moved on. We're better. It's no longer a big deal. And her brain is fearful for a long, long time that the other shoe's going to drop. I'm going to get hurt again. And when she sees that you've moved on and forgotten, or feels like you've forgotten, I think it doubles down her brain going, well, then I have to hold on to this because I will have to protect myself. Yeah. He's not helping protect me. So men, when you enter into that moment, say, I know how much this hurt. I know I was responsible. I will own that, and I'm not going to forget. It's always going to be important to me to make this change. It then communicates to her brain, it's okay for you to let go. Totally. It's okay for you because I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to let go of being vigilant in this area. Yeah.
Well, I forgot to tell you the most important aspect of that APSATS model, and that is the restoration of self. And in IRCM, we call it post-traumatic growth. And I promise you that as a couple, you can get to post-traumatic growth. But to speak to your point, Trevor, I think maybe it was Nick, what I know is that oftentimes he doesn't feel like he deserves post-traumatic growth. He really has been traumatized by what he did. And he's afraid to get healthy and stay healthy and show her that, for fear that he doesn't really deserve it. So part of post-traumatic growth is really being able to, as a couple, figure out how you're stronger and what you've learned from this horrible ordeal that nobody would have asked for.
Yeah.
And then how to give back. And that is where I want my addicts and partners as couples to go. I'm a mental health therapist of 43 years, and I've been a coach for over 15. And I really believe that people can heal from this if they work together.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about this a number of times as a central piece, this communication aspect of all of this. And for some couples, and I would say maybe a lot of couples after discovery, especially in this recovery and healing process, every time they try to communicate, it ends up being a fight. Like it just ends up getting out of hand. And it's about this healing and recovery process. So do you have suggestions for couples to help strengthen their communication and find ways to make that every conversation they have doesn't end up becoming a fight or a battle?
Yes, I do. And that is ultimately to practice those relational skills and help her heal and help them heal. The reflective listening. And for the first year, reflective listening should be only the addict listening to the partner. She's got that much stored up energy. Now you think, oh my gosh, well, that will never, they'll never be able to meet in the middle again. But the truth is, once she really feels heard, and that really only takes about 6 months, she will start engaging him to understand him better and to know what his thoughts are. So I would say use reflective listening. Of course, I want them to use AVR, and I want them to practice skills in the book like mirroring. And that is really breathing the same pace as your partner, or letting her speak for 3 minutes and then repeating back exactly what you heard her say so that she knows she was heard. That brings down the conflict. The important thing is when there is conflict, he's got to stay out of shame. He's got to remember that he's helping her heal. And even if she jabs him a couple of times, that's not because she doesn't love him. That's because she's poking him to make sure he's going to respond with empathy, kindness, compassionate.
Yeah,
I would say get a specialist who can help you with this.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But they have to know early recovery couple skills. Again, if they jump into the meat, we got a problem. And couples can practice, and help them heal. There's all sorts of exercises they can do. But if he's looking at help her heal, he needs to maybe be able to write out his willingness list of what he's willing to do to make her feel safe. And read it to her. And ask her if there's anything she would add. And practice that willingness. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I can't underscore enough to how valuable in my story, and I've seen for many couples, it is to have planned communication around this topic. Because if the only time you are talking is when she's triggered or when you've said something stupid or there's been a reminder that, hey, we have to deal with this, or you're on your way to the counseling appointment and you're both kind of amped up, it's going to be kind of stress-induced. But if you know, like Carol brought up, like Thanos or some of those check-in sheets that she has, 5 nights a week, if you know, okay, every weeknight at 10 p.m. after the kids are in bed, we're going to take 10 minutes in our bedroom or on the couch, and we're going to walk through this list, and we're just going to communicate. And there's something about it being kind of this planned, non-stress-filled opportunity that we're going to start to learn the language of each other's emotions and experience that I think really can become the building blocks for those moments when she is triggered or you have said something stupid and it is a little bit more of a conflict. If you don't have the tools or foundation in place before that, it will always be a fight. So have those planned opportunities where you just know in a safe structure using one of these tools. For my wife and I, it was the faster scale. We're going to communicate what's going on, and that really can build your skill in this area.
Yeah. It's just really clear too. I think a lot of addicted or struggling spouses in this situation feel like they have no control, feel like they don't have a way to help this process. And it's so clear from our conversation that we do. We can be empathetic. We can push into emotional intimacy with our spouse, we can, beside just working on our recovery, which is such a huge aspect and element to all of this, there are things we can do and we can practice to improve us as a person, our communication, and our relationship with our spouse. And Carol, if you would be willing to, we would love to have you back on again. This has been a really great conversation. We love your work. We love just what you have to offer. And so thank you so much for your time and for the work that you do, just being with us today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And I love to talk to men in recovery, in good, solid recovery, because it shows. Thank you so much.